John chapter 18. We'll start reading in verse 28. John chapter 18, verse 28. They led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. So Pilate went outside to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" And they answered him, "If this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." The Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken to show by what kind of death he was going to die. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews, but my kingdom is not of this world." Then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate said, "What is truth?" After he said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, "I find no guilt in him. But you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. So do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" They cried out again, "Not this man, but Barabbas." And Barabbas was a robber. Then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him. Soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and arrayed him in a purple robe. And they came up to him saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and struck him with their hands. Pilate went out again and said to them, "See, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no guilt in him." So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and a purple robe. And Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." And when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law, he ought to die because he has made himself the Son of God." When Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. He entered his headquarters again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "You will not speak to me. Do you not know that I have authority to release you and the authority to crucify you?" And Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me at all, unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin." From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat him down at the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement in an Aramaic Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour, and he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." They cried out, away with him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So he delivered him over to them to be crucified. Now, I told you last time we were together that I would move on from Pilate, but there was just a lot of details that in the story of Pilate and the story of those who encountered Jesus and were around Jesus that I didn't get to go over, and especially in a lesson like this when it comes to a men's class. And you know, anyway, it's hard for me to get through a text without kind of diving deeper into it. So we'll see where this lesson goes and how far we get over and how much we cover. But the first thing I want to do is kind of do some review. And when it came to John chapter 18, we saw the hypocrisy of the Jews who brought Jesus to Pilate, okay? And in Matthew's account that we're going to go to later on, we will see some very interesting things that happen when it comes to this crowd and who it was made up of. But this Jewish mob, very early in the morning, took Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the house of the Roman governor Pilate. It's very interesting, too, because they had no problem bringing false charges against Jesus or bearing false witness against Jesus or paying people off to betray Jesus when it came to Judas, but they didn't want to defile themselves by doing what? You remember? They didn't want to defile themselves by going on to Gentile property or going in a Gentile house. So shedding innocent blood and bringing out the death of Jesus, you know, that was fine, but there's no way they'd set foot on the property of a Gentile when it came to Pilate. Touch the Gentile soil with my foot, that's not going to happen. So we talked about hypocrisy a couple of weeks ago, the speck that's in your own eye versus the plank that's in your brother's eye. And then we zoomed in on the account of Pilate from John's Gospel, and we talked about the positive of Pilate, which we don't talk about very often, and how Pilate examined both sides of the issue that was brought before him. He did the right thing at first, okay? He was brought an accusation, or someone who was accused. He brought Jesus into the judgment hall. He left those accusers outside. He went back and forth when it came to examining Jesus, and then, wanting to understand the accusations that were brought by the crowd. So this back and forth of Pilate going in and talking to Jesus, Pilate going out and talking to the Jews. So Pilate examines both sides. And what the interesting thing was last time is that Pilate came to the right conclusion about Jesus, and he stated the right conclusion about Jesus several times. And that statement that he repeated over and over again was, I find no what? Fault. I find no fault in this man. So yes, Pilate was doing his job. He examined Jesus, and the evidence all pointed to the fact that Jesus was guilty of no crime. And when we find the truth, and we see the truth, our actions and our choices and our behaviors have to agree with that truth, or we will sin. Let me say it again. When we find the truth, our behavior and our choices have to agree with the truth that we have found when it comes to the truth being given us. Pilate knew that Jesus was innocent. And as Pilate said, if you have the power to kill, to crucify, or to release, which Pilate said of his own free will, he said, I have the power to either release you or crucify you. If you have the power to release someone or crucify them, and you know that they are innocent, then what action should be followed? You have to let them go. If you're following the truth, you have to let them go. You have to release them. The behavior of seeing the truth and agreeing with the truth is that you release Jesus. But what did Pilate do to Jesus in John chapter 19, verse 1? He scourged him, he flogged him, he beat him, paraded him around, put a crown of thorns on his head. And if you remember, Jesus did not let Pilate off when it came to his sinful decision. Last time we were together, we talked about John chapter 19, verse 11, where it says, he who delivered you over to me, has me over to you, has the greater sin. It wasn't that Pilate wasn't in sin. It was that there was a greater sin that was committed because the Jews were given the prophecies and the writings about the Messiah, and the Jews were given the opportunity to see the miracles of Jesus and all the things that he taught and said and spoke, and they came face to face with the Son of God. So he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin does not let Pilate off the hook, because even though the Jews committed a greater sin by bringing Jesus, what was Pilate still doing when he rejected the truth that was right in front of him? He was sinning. So when the truth is right in front of you and your behavior and your actions go the opposite direction of the truth, that is sin. We talked about James 4, verse 17. To him who knows to do good and does it not, to him it is what? It is sin. Then we saw how Pilate let the importance of his career and his own advancement up the ladder become more important than acting on the truth. More important than protecting the innocent. Pilate sacrificed acting on the truth for his own benefit. And when Pilate learned the truth and the innocence of Jesus, that was the point of no return. When Pilate came to them over and over again and says, I find no fault in this man, I find no guilt in this man, the action should have connected with the profession. When you are face to face with the truth, that is when there's a point of no return. You either follow that truth because you know it's the truth, or you do something else and you leave it. And there are plenty of reasons and emotions in this text that we looked at last week, which is ironic because on Sunday morning, when it comes to the story of Adam and Eve and them being cast out of the garden, we're going to look at how the emotions of the Garden of Eden were affected by sin, corrupted by sin. So that's going to be a fun study. But Pilate, all throughout this, you can see all kinds of emotions when it comes to Pilate. He was afraid, he was pressured, he was threatened, he was cynical, he was dismissive. But there's a point where Pilate's emotions were corrupted and his actions became sinful. He knew that Jesus was innocent. He knew that Jesus had committed no crime. Yet there was something that he did that made no sense. He punished Jesus, not because he was guilty of anything. He punished Jesus even though he knew that he was innocent and he knew he didn't do anything worthy of punishment. So that was John chapter 18, all right? And I want to move over to Matthew. If you want to turn over there to Matthew chapter 27, we're going to read. I want to turn to Matthew chapter 27, and read some more into the detail of this landscape and kind of set the stage even more, because there's a lot in the Gospel of Matthew that is not in the Gospel of John. And just to get our minds back on this picture before we start reading, Jesus has had a very long night of these mock and sham trials when it comes to Caiaphas and Annas and all that. And the most powerful people in the Jewish religion basically have dragged him around. And now he's dragged in the early morning hours in front of the Roman governor. And in Matthew 27, verse 1, it says that Jesus was bound. I'm sure they didn't, tie his hands too tight or anything, and it's the week before Passover, which means that the population of the Jews in Jerusalem has exploded, so there's like 1 million more Jews in Jerusalem than usual. And there's an ever-growing crowd outside of Pilate's complex. And this crowd is made up of some very interesting people, and that's what I want to look at in Matthew chapter 27 here. Matthew chapter 27, beginning verse 1. When the morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate the governor. Then when Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he changed his mind, brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and said, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. And they said, what is that to us? See to it yourself. And throwing down the pieces of silver into the temple, he departed and went out and hanged himself. But the chief priests, taking the pieces of silver, said, it is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since it is blood money. So they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. Therefore that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken by the prophet Jeremiah, saying, and they took 30 pieces of silver, the price of him on whom a price had been set by some of the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field as the Lord directed. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus said, you have said so. But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. Pilate said to him, do you not hear how many things they testify against you? But he gave no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release to the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted, and they had then a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they gathered, Pilate said to them, whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Christ? For he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, while sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, I have nothing to do with a righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream. Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor again said to them, which of the two do you want me to release to you? And they said, Barabbas. Pilate said to them, then what shall I do with Jesus who is called the Christ? And they all said, let him be crucified. And he said, why? What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more, let him be crucified. One of the interesting things that John does not tell us about the crowd that was outside of Pilate's residence is that Judas has been somewhere in this picture. Judas has been watching or seeing the events unfold that he has helped to unfold. And Judas apparently has followed the trials of Jesus, observed what they were doing to Jesus in some way. We don't know if Judas was around in the darkness of the night when it came to being in Caiaphas' house or at Annas' house, but we do know that Judas was observing what was happening to Jesus when the events of the judgment hall took place. Judas saw what his betrayal had done to Jesus. Now you have to remember, how long did Judas follow Jesus? How long was he a disciple? At least how many years? 3 years. With each slap that Jesus had, with each punch, each drop of blood, apparently it was eating away at Judas. And Judas knew, when he saw all these things unfolding, that there was nowhere for him to go. Think about this like you were Judas. You betrayed the Son of God. You betrayed your teacher. All right? You betrayed him for 30 pieces of silver, which the chief priests gave to you. So Judas knew he could never go back to that inner circle of the disciples and be the same, who had become his family over the last 3 years. He couldn't go back to the 12. He knew that the Jewish leadership was done with him. He would have been labeled as someone who was of no more use. He was kind of like a loose end, I guess you would say. The Jewish government wasn't going to send out a memo to everybody that they had bribed one of Jesus' disciples to get him to a place where they could arrest him. They weren't going to publicize that. that Judas was the one who betrayed Jesus and connect themselves with Judas. They were going to distance themselves from Judas. So you have Judas being distanced when it came to the chief priests and the rulers, whom he got the money from. You've got Judas thinking that he could never go back to the 12 because he has betrayed the Son of God. Judas is in no man's land right now. He is an outcast when it comes to both parties. Now we know that Judas could have gone to Jesus. He could have gone back to the apostles. He could have. But put yourself in Judas' shoes. Where do you think you are as Judas? Are you going to go back to the disciples? Are you going to go back and say, I'm really sorry for getting Jesus into this mess? Are you going to go back to the chief priests who gave you the money and say, I want a place at the table? Judas is radioactive. And as the sun rose over Jerusalem that day, the guilt and the betrayal being the instrument that brought Jesus into the hands of this angry mob, when Judas saw that Jesus was condemned. That's a very interesting phrase. When Judas saw that Jesus was condemned, Judas knew that Jesus was not going to get out of this. Once the Sanhedrin council said, you're dead, you're pretty much dead. So, the Bible tells us that Judas changed his mind. Matthew 27, verse 3. Now, he changed his mind, but he also went back to the temple where he got the money in the first place. The interesting thing that I didn't write down, they had a problem with putting the money back into the treasury. What's the irony in that? They had a problem putting the money back into the treasury because it was blood money. What's the irony on the other end of it? Where did they get the money in the first place? Out of the treasury. They had a problem getting the money and putting it back into the treasury once Jesus had been betrayed, once he was condemned. They had no problem giving Judas that money out of the treasury when it comes to what he was supposed to do when it came to his brow. Now, Judas changed his mind. And this is an interesting turn of phrase because of who we're talking about when it comes to Pilate. And I want you to see the parallel here. Because when Judas throws down the money into the temple, what does he say? I have betrayed innocent blood. What did Pilate say? What did Pilate say about Jesus? I find no fault. Jesus is innocent. Judas threw the money down and said, I have shed innocent blood. So there's a pattern here when it comes to Pilate, when it comes to Judas in Matthew chapter 27. They both knew that Jesus was innocent of any crime. They both knew the truth about Jesus. The interesting thing, too, is that Pilate came to that conclusion very quickly after his examination of Jesus. Now go to the other side. You have Pilate who examines Jesus. We don't know how many hours he examines Jesus, but after a very short period of time compared to Judas, Pilate comes to the conclusion there is no guilt in Jesus. How long did Judas have to try to find some guilt in Jesus? Judas, he went around with Jesus in the public. He went around with Jesus in private. He listened to Jesus when he was in public. He listened to Jesus when he was in private. He saw everything that Jesus did. And yet, Judas knew that Jesus was innocent. The other thing that probably weighed on Judas's mind, Judas was a Jew. Knew the Old Testament law very well. There's a very specific law that probably weighed very heavily on Judas's mind when it came to what he was doing and what he had done. And it's up there on the screen in Deuteronomy 27, verse 25. Curses anyone who accepts a bribe to strike down an innocent person. What did Judas say from his own mouth? I betrayed innocent blood. How did that come about? What did he take in order to betray? He took a bribe. And the law of Moses was very, very clear on this. Cursed is the man who takes a bribe in order to harm someone who's innocent. Pretty much sums up what Judas did. So Judas knew that his own actions of taking that bribe to bring about the innocent death of someone was something that cursed him. Judas knew the truth about Jesus, and to the add to the feeling of isolation and being cast out, this is something that amazes me too, because Judas went back to the temple to give back the money. And I was trying to put myself in like a preacher position, because he's going back to the chief priest, right? And he's trying to do the right thing. He's trying to give back the money. He's trying to go back on what he did when it comes to betraying Jesus, and he changed his mind. To me, if you came to my office and you were doing something and you changed your mind and you went out and you actively wanted to seek, restitution for what you had done, to give back what it is that you stole or that you were brought, that would be great. If you came into the office and you said, I've done this, but I want to give this back, and I've changed my mind. Can you imagine sitting down with someone who is in that position and saying what the chief priest said? What did the chief priest say to Judas? We don't care. You did this to yourself. You made your bed, lie in it. There's a part of me that understands why they're doing this, because of the wickedness that they had. But I can't imagine looking at someone who is struggling in their mind to change it and actually doing something to change their activity, and looking at them and going, it's your fault anyway, get out of here. But that's what the chief priest did. They looked at Judas and said, that's your problem. Deal with it. That's what you did. Deal with it. Now getting back to Pilate, Jesus is in the judgment hall. You have this Jewish crowd that's outside. You have the Pilate going back and forth, examining Jesus, and then going back and talking to the Jewish crowd outside, listening to the accusations. And this is where I want to stop for a second, okay? In Matthew 27 and verse 18, this adds more to John chapter 18 to me. Pilate knew that it was out of envy that they delivered Jesus to him. That amazes me that statement is there. Pilate knew that the only reason they delivered Jesus was out of envy. Pilate knew there was no fault in Jesus. That's John chapter 18 at least 4 times. That there was nothing that Jesus did that was worthy of any punishment, much less death. And the Bible says that Pilate saw through the charade. And he knew that the only reason Jesus was standing before them was because they were envious. Pilate was amazed at Jesus. When it came to him not answering any of the accusations that the chief priests had, every single time they had an accusation, Jesus would not say a word. He talked to Pilate. He wouldn't say a word. And that amazed Pilate. So the Jewish leadership was envious of Jesus. Pilate is this outsider looking in. You have to remember that Pilate is a Roman. He's not a Jew. Pilate is outside looking in. And he knows that this group of Jews that brought Jesus is doing this for a particular reason. And he's nailed that reason down. You remember back in John chapter 18, verse 31, whenever they brought the accusation against Jesus, they said, we wouldn't bring him before you unless he's done something worthy of death, unless he's done something wrong. You can trust us. And Pilate looks at him in a dismissive way, and he says, go and handle this under your own laws. What does this have to do with Rome? He knew that they were envious. He knew that the only reason that they brought Jesus before him was because of envy. Now, I want to define that word so that we can see how this is like gravy over the plate when it comes to this picture, and it covers everything, and it gives it so much more flavor. The word envy, I did not know this until I started studying. It's a very fun word when it comes to the original Greek language. The Greek was the language the New Testament was written in. It's written up there for you. That's a fun word. I mean, just looking at that word, that's not a misspelling. I mean, how many times have you seen a word that starts with 4 consonants? If you ever get asked that question, you can have this one. Okay? 4 consonants. Phonos. The PH is silent. I don't know why that is. But here, this is the simple definition, all right? The act or attitude of negative, destructive response towards the good of others. Let's say it again. The act or attitude of negative, destructive response towards the good of others. Envy is not greed. Let me try to boil this down. Envy is not greed. Envy is not just greed. To take other people's bliss and happiness, all right? It's not just jealousy. Because jealousy is when you're desiring to possess and covet what someone else has that's not yours so you can own it. Envy is when you desire to vandalize and destroy something that is good in others. Let me say that again. Envy, the background of the word, envy has to do with destruction. The destruction of something good or someone good just to destroy it. It's a very bizarre thing when you think about it. As one not so great movie put it, it is the desire to destroy something beautiful just because it's beautiful. Isn't that bizarre? We're going to talk about this during the invitation, but you remember that crazy story about King Solomon whenever you had these two women who had newborns, and you remember this story? They had two newborns. One of them died during the night because the mother accidentally smothered it, and the one who smothered her baby accidentally at night took the baby from the mother who had a still living child and replaced that baby with the one who had been smothered during the night. And then King Solomon is thought, what are we going to do? And what does Solomon say? Yeah, bring me a sword. We're going to cut him in half. You know what the response of the... Yeah, he says it to both of them. Do you remember what the response was of the false mother? We're going to talk about this at length when it comes to the invitation. Divided. This is the illustration of envy. When just because you can't have something as beautiful, you want to destroy everything that is. That story is the definition of envy. That you want to destroy everything beautiful just because. It's seeing the good or the blessing or some positive in someone else, and you are studying to find a fault so that you can torpedo whatever it is that they have. It is not just to destroy good. It is to destroy good just because. I was doing too much research on this, but the verb form of this word means that you watch something decay. You watch something waste away. I want you to imagine picking a flower just to see it die. That's what envy is. I'm not saying that you pick a flower and you watch it die that you're envious. I'm just saying that's an illustration of envy, that you pick a flower just to watch it die. I was thinking of another illustration, and I thought about not putting it in here, but it was one that, I don't know why, it stuck in my brain. I want you to imagine me bringing a puppy home for Kinley and Connor. And I take that puppy and I put it out in the driveway and I run over right in front of them. That's envy. Destroy something beautiful just because. Destroy something good just because. So imagine you're watching someone succeed in a job, in a business, financially, whatever it is. And you see all the things that they have, all right? And it's not jealousy. When it's envy, you're looking for a way to bring that down to the negative. You are looking for a way to disintegrate whatever it is that they have. Just think about that mother. When it came to the false mother, think about what was going through her head. Whenever she saw that her baby had died and was smothered that night, what is it that goes through your head whenever you look over at another baby and say, I'm going to steal that one, and I'm going to put my dead baby right beside that mother? What goes through your head? Do you know what that's going to do? Absolutely. Do you know that that's going to destroy that mother when she wakes up? Absolutely. So ask yourself this question. Have you ever wanted to see someone in misery just because you saw them happy?
And do you think the root of that is because you don't have what they have?
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, you have the synonyms of jealousy and envy and greed, all of them.
So to me, it's not just because they desire to vandalize good. They want to vandalize good because they don't have it.
Yeah. And that's a part of it, as far as the word that I've researched, but
Same thing with Christ. I think they saw what he had because he was good.
and he was nothing but good.
But if we go to Luke 23,
I-
we get just a little bit deeper glimpse into what specifically the accusation were. Matthew and John don't give the details of what the accusation was. But Luke 23, verse 2 says, "And they began to accuse him, saying, We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king." And Pilate said, "Are you a king of the Jews?" And he said, of course, he answered Pilate,
Mm-hmm.
"You have said so." And Pilate said, "I find no guilt in this man." But they were urgent, saying, stirring up the people. If we keep reading, and where Pilate sent him to Herod, and Herod sent it back, and then Pilate and Herod became best friends after that, and been against each other, and then Pilate got, and Herod became friends with each other in verse 12, and then that very day, for before they had been enemies with each other. So Pilate called the rulers and brought him to him and said, "You brought me this man as one who was misleading the people. And after examining him before you, behold, I did not find this man guilty of any of the charges against him." Not just one,
Yep.
any of them. Neither did Herod. He sent them back to us. Nothing deserving death as this guy done. I'll punish him therefore and release him.
Yep.
And Matthew and John don't give us that detail about, that specific detail about what the actual accusations were. And I think it's really, really good when we put all of those together. And
Oh, yeah.
all of that detail.
Yes. I still don't understand because all the times that they said Jesus was innocent, and then what he said at the end was, "I'll punish him and flog him and then let him go." It was like, you just said he was innocent. What does he need punishment for?
Well, Herod punished him too.
Yeah, what does he need punishment for?
And you mentioned earlier verse 14 of 27 when you loved the fact that he was amazed that Jesus said nothing. You know, I think about that. How many times when we are called out and we know we're innocent and we just fight back to prove ourselves? Jesus didn't have to because his actions spoke for himself. And I wonder if that's the reason behind his amazement, because he knew, I mean, we see right after that, he said he knew that there was envy, that's why they handed him over. He said he had no guilt. He knew it. So I wonder if that was the reason for his true amazement, was that he knows he's innocent. I know he's innocent, and he's not fighting back. He's letting this happen.
That is amazing.
Because we would fight back.
Yep. Sorry, I was thinking about a lesson that I've wanted to put together for a long time, but it's just kind of been one of those things in the back of your brain. And I was in a phone call with somebody not too long ago that said, "What do you think about this?" And I said, "I don't have an opinion that I want to share with you." They said, "I know you have an opinion." I was like, I have an opinion. I don't want to share it.
And he was amazed.
Seriously, it was. It was like, "Well, why don't you want to give your opinion?" I was like, "It doesn't matter." So yeah, how many people have you met that don't give you an opinion when you ask for it? There's probably more people that will give you your opinion without even asking for it than You know the person who won't give you an opinion when you do ask for it. So, this is, and that now amazes me even more to think about how that ties into Isaiah 53, you know, a lamb before the slaughter, and, you know, and that was another thing, he was led everywhere. He was bound and led. This is the Son of God, and he allowed all this to happen. He's led to Pilate, he's led to the cross. And he could have done anything he wanted to, said anything he wanted to, and yet, like you said, he didn't.
We sometimes forget about the legion, the 10,000
Yeah.
angels that were standing with all weapons they had. They were standing there ready, waiting on the word, because they were coming. All it took was one word. They were ready.
Mm.
But I think Pilate kind of punished him because of the fact he thought that would be enough for them to say, okay, that's enough.
Yeah, there's a big debate about Pilate when it comes to that. Was he a good guy? Was he a bad guy? Was he compassionate? Is he trying to do this? Is he trying to do that? There's a big debate about it. But yes, that could have been. But he was trying to get Jesus released because he knew he was innocent. Depends on the backstory you believe about Pilate sometimes. But there's one more verse that I want to go over, and that's Galatians chapter 5, verse 26. Paul tells us, and he uses the exact same word. He says, let us not desire to act out of envy. To act out of envy. Don't desire to destroy other people's good. Don't desire to tear them down whenever something positive is happening. And it describes this when you have clear waters that are muddied by pollution or by something else. There's the clear that you know. And then when envy comes along, everything is just put in a blender. So Pilate knew that the reason they delivered Jesus was because of envy. And if they wanted to destroy something that was clearly innocent. So, before we close, anything that's stuck in your mind? Anything that pops up? Any verse that maybe you hadn't gone over in a while that you saw? Description? Just stare. All right. We'll see what next week holds. I may go away from Pilate and Judas. I don't know. Depends on what I see in the chapters.
Do you think Judas would have had access to Jesus?
Judas?
After he took the money back?
I don't know. You're talking about access to Jesus in what way?
To confess his sin to him versus to the priest.
I think there's a,
I mean, it probably would have been hard to get to him.
Yes. Would have been an opportunity to do something
Yeah.
besides what he did, I guess.
Because had he gone to Christ,
Yeah.
he would have received a completely different answer.
Yeah. But that's why I said I want you to put yourself in Judas's shoes, because when you don't feel like there's anywhere you can go, that's where Judas was. I would like to hope that everything would have turned out a little better.
Which is important to us because how we respond to other people's sin can push them down the wrong path.
That's a really good point.